Hey there, word wizards! Welcome to another episode of Am I Right? I'm so excited for today's guest, mainly because, I love the genre that she writes in, but also because she's fantastic and has things coming up for us down the pipeline pretty soon here in the winter. And I just want to welcome you on, JC. Thank you so much for taking the time to come be on our show and give us some advice.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And I'm going to read her bio really quickly. It's so cute. JC Peterson is an author of contemporary rom-coms. She graduated from Michigan State University with a degree in journalism, worked for years as an award-winning journalist in Oklahoma, and now lives in Denver, Colorado with her husband and children. Being Mary Bennett is her debut novel, which is already out, and was released in March 2022. A companion novel, Lola at last will release with Harper Teen in the winter of 2023, end of February-ish.
hmm
When not dreaming up funny contemporary stories or hurting children, she loves to eat and shop local, explore the Colorado mountains, and plan new adventures. So that's a fabulous bit of information about her already, but I'm going to let her introduce herself beyond her blurb and tell you a little bit about her works in progress. So do you wanna introduce yourself to the audience?
Yeah. So thanks everyone for being here. So like I said, I'm JC Peterson. I go by Jenny, so it's still like a work in progress to figure out how I talk about myself. So I have my first book was Being Mary Bennett, and it is inspired by Pride and Prejudice and is telling the story of the middle Bennett sister, my Mary, right? She's called Marnie in my world. And she is trying to figure out where she belongs in her family and in the larger world. She has that like classic middle sister syndrome. So she's trying to figure out like who she really is and how she wants to use her voice and how to maybe not be so awkward and pedantic in every second of her life. So that came out last March, and it was just so much fun to write. And then I was able to write a companion novel, which honestly, going into Being Mary Bennett, I didn't think that I was going to have. I thought it was just going to be one off, standalone, totally done. And then Lola appeared on screen. She's Marnie's little sister. And the first time that she showed up, I was like, oh, you're great. I want to write about you. So she is the Lydia Bennett character. And she has she's a disaster, right? Anyone who's seen Pride and Prejudice knows that Lydia is
She's a mess.
just just a garbage disaster person. She's constantly making mistakes. She's so selfish. She is just like, oh man. But when I started thinking about her, I started thinking she's like a 15-year-old girl in the world of Pride and Prejudice who's preyed on by a creeper. And now she's going to have to deal with these consequences for the rest of her life. Like she's held up in Pride and Prejudice as what you don't want to happen, right? She's the cautionary tale. She was also a
Mhm.
child. And so I started thinking about like she deserves to be able to have a chance to make mistakes a ton, but grow from them and still be able to have a life that isn't just all pinned to this several bad things that she's done. And so that's when I went into her story. I was like, okay, she's going to be a mess, but I also want to give her the chance to like be messy, but still come into her own and still know that she has a future that isn't just always going to be dragging, her past isn't always going to be dragging her down. So Lola was a lot of fun to write, like so much fun to write. And it takes place with her camping and hiking and doing all these things that she really hates because she'd rather be like on a beach with some sort of like chilled coffee drink. um, so Lola at Last comes out it's like February 28th, 2023. So last day of February. And I'm super, super excited about it.
Well, I'm excited too, listening to the bio, and I love that fresh twist on her because she is the hated character, right? And so, or at least the cautionary character. So I'm excited to kind of get to know her more from a different perspective. That will be really fun. And of course, the first book is adorable and quirky, and everyone should read it. So glad you introduced that as well. Um, sh- kind of off screen, we talked a little bit about how she is JC's kind of, and I can call you Jenny if that's what you prefer.
Jenny, JC, I am trying to get used to responding to both. So,
Maybe we'll just interchange it.
yeah.
Writing dialogue and messy characters, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on how those are kind of combined because they seem like something that you use together, that you talked about.
Yeah, I love if I could have two characters just like in a room with banter all day, I would do that. The plot would be terrible, right? We need things to pull them through. So I like to give my characters, they can make mistakes. I like that. I like to have them be kind of messy and kind of screw ups sometimes, especially writing for teens. I feel like I want teens to be able to see somebody on the page who is also making bad decisions, right? Because part of being a teen is like pushing your boundaries and figuring out where your line is, where your morals, are living, and screwing up and then trying again. That's the whole point of growing up, right? And so I want to show my characters screwing up and learning from it. Um, and I like to make it fun with the dialogue. Like I love writing dialogue so much. So seeing them like work through their things in that like back and forth with a character where they are coming at a problem from two different ways, and they're just like it's where they rub up against each other, right? This dialogue is where you get really good tension. Especially writing contemporaries where I'm not going to have an alien come down and insert tension that way, or like a mythical beast. So the tension really has to come from the characters and what they're working through together, what they're working through with the outside world. So
Right, and teens, of course, there should be plenty of opportunities to depict struggles and flaws, right? And
right.
actually, in one of our more recent episodes, they talked about how taking that moment to pause and explain the things in the room or give a background is actually hurting the plot, right? You should be using your dialogue as a device. You should be using
Yep.
your messy characters as a device to move the plot forward, right? Because the plot does rule all, but it can be moved forward in multiple ways, and I think dialogue is overlooked a lot of the time at
Oh
the top of
yeah.
the levels.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I feel like you can use dialogue to, again, because each scene, right? We need to go into it with your characters wanting something, right? Like even if it's something super small, they go in wanting something, and the scene revolves around like, do they learn more about that want? Do they get that want denied to them? Or I always like, do they get their want and then realize like, oh man, this isn't actually the thing I thought it was going to be.
Mm.
And I feel like that can really keep the pace going. And then I also like dialogue, like you were saying, for moving the plot forward. Instead of being like, hello, I've entered a room, there's a vase of flowers by the window. The way the character interacts with that room, the way the character walks in and can be like, those flowers smell like a funeral home. That's such a good way for them to, you're showing your character and the things that they notice, and you're getting in some of those scene details and the atmosphere without stopping. So I
Mm.
like to always keep my characters moving through their space, through the scene, and always having a feeling of there's momentum instead of
Mm.
just like stop, talk, nothing else is happening.
Mm.
So I find that's
So use
helpful.
dialogue intentionally, everyone.
Yeah,
It's
yeah. And
powerful tool. Yes.
and a lot of that I think comes through revision. That's my big thing that I always say, like, that first draft when you're trying to get it on the page, I I don't think about it. I'm just like, what is happening? Make it happen. I'll figure it out later. And it's in those revisions where I go through and I start refining. So definitely the first draft I write, it's like, hello, room. Room is square. Room is, you just like, you get it all down, right? Because the point is just to finish that first time. And then you refine when you go back and you find ways to weave things in without it being, just like a giant block of exposition.
You're telling me that your manuscript doesn't come out perfectly as you're writing it on the page? Wow. What a revelation.
Maybe by like draft 10, I start being like, oh, look, this works. Um, I'm a fast drafter. I know, I'm sure there are people out there whose drafts, whose first drafts are so considered and everything is there. For me, I'm one who I like to have a deadline, right toward that deadline and make it happen and just like get it out. And then I go back. So
That's a useful skill to have. I think a lot of people, the creativity shuts down because of the deadline rather than kind of motivating you to get out everything that you need to before. So, I mean, that's
yeah,
one thing about it because it's so different for each writer, the
Hmm.
process, and you just have to find what works for you.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
And for me, I think I just don't have, that goes into being like, I have two kids. I have other things that I do. Like, I don't have the luxury to just wait for the creativity to come to me. I have to use tricks to just like make it happen. And I think it helps too that I come from the journalism world where like you have deadlines and you have to meet those deadlines or else there's a blank spot in the paper. So, you just kind of have to do it.
Make it.
Yeah. And sometimes you have such crap writing days, like where every word you write, you're like, man, everything is garbage. But at
Mhm.
least it's garbage that's on the page that you can like maybe turn into something.
Mm.
So
Can't do
yeah.
anything with word vomit if there is no word vomit, right?
Right. Right.
Yes.
And the only thing you do with the blank page is like turn it into a paper airplane. So,
I'm
you just
glad that
gotta.
you mentioned that, we forget. You just need to get it out. Just get it out. It's okay if it's crap. You'll fix it later
Totally.
and keep going, keep moving forward. So with that, I mean, you mentioned you don't have time with these deadlines to just wait around, but you did have an interesting publishing journey.
Yeah,
And it does have kind of an undercurrent of perseverance. So would you mind sharing some of that with the audience of your journey in publishing?
sure. No, so I've been at this for a really long time. Hopefully it's not so long for everybody else, but the more that I talk to other writers, other authors, it is long for all of us. And it's never, it's never a straight path. There's always detours. There's always things that we need to climb over to keep going. So I started writing. I'm 40. I published my first book at 40. And I started writing seriously, thinking that I wanted to write fiction at, it was like 24, 25. I had moved to a new city. I didn't know anybody. And I wrote a book. I'd never taken a class. My degree is in journalism and I was working as a journalist. So fiction is different, right? Like fiction is doing different things. So I knew the mechanics of writing, but actually making a story that was anything. I mean, but you know what? I did it. I got it on the page. It was crap. But because I was new to it, I didn't think it was crap. I was like, cool, first draft, let's query. And it didn't go anywhere, right? Like obviously it didn't go anywhere. But there was something about once I had tapped into that part of my brain, it's just like character and story and snippets of dialogue, things like that just kept always being in my brain all the time. And so I would write down ideas right when I could. And so I slowly started trying, like teaching myself how to write fiction just by trying it, screwing up, and learning from it. When I first started writing, I wrote YA fantasy because I love to read YA fantasy. And I just wasn't very good at it, right? Like I couldn't do it. So during I did Nano in 2012 and I wrote a contemporary piece. And I have to call out my husband because he was like, Jenny, no one is gonna care about a cheerleader. I wrote about a cheerleader. And he's like, come on, they're the ones that like nobody likes because they're bullies. And I was like, but not mine. And I signed with an agent with that one. I like it all. It just felt very right. But that book went on submission and died. Like it was on submission for more than a year, didn't get picked up. And so at that time, I was writing Being Mary Bennett and I was pregnant and I was trying to like get it done before I had my second kid. And I finished it at about 38 weeks pregnant, turned it into my agent at the time. And she was like, hey, can we jump on a call? And she was leaving the business. And so I had this major setback. I felt anyone who's been pregnant, you have some hormones happening. You're not perhaps feeling, your most like even keeled self. And so I had a baby and I had this book baby that I was like orphaned and I didn't know what to do with. And so I was like, you know what, this is my sign. I'm done. I've put my time in, I have tried, and this isn't going to happen for me. And so I quit writing for a full year. And I would say, I feel like the knee-jerk reaction there is to tell people, hey, that was a mistake. Don't do that. You should always keep going. but I needed that space. And I think it's okay to take time away when you need it. Because if you're just like forcing something over and over, sometimes the best thing you can do is to take a walk, is to go to a movie with friends, is to not think about it for a little bit. And that's when your brain starts, making different connections and problem solving. And so I took a full year off, told everybody outwardly that I was done writing. I was never going to write again. I couldn't, I pragmatically, I couldn't justify it. But I was also still having a notebook with like ideas and lines, and this notebook that I've had going since I was 25 and trying to write. And so I applied to Pitch Wars, which for anybody who doesn't know is a mentorship program. Sadly, it's no longer going on, but it was this very intense mentorship program where you applied and you would go through this kind of like shortened timeline edit with your mentor. I had two mentors, Sabrina Lotfi and Carrie S. Allen, who are just like amazing writers. And we did this. We edited my whole book. They picked me up. We edited the book. I didn't tell anybody I was in Pitch Wars except for my husband and I think like a couple friends. Everyone else, I was like, no, I'm not writing anymore. And then in the background, I'm like furiously editing this book because I feel like I didn't want to disappoint anybody, right? I had tried, I had failed. It wasn't going to happen. And I got through it. I got an agent from Pitch Wars and we sold Being Mary Bennett in a couple months. It was really fast. So, on the surface, it looks like, oh, look, Jenny got into Pitch Wars and sold a book right away. But behind that was 10 years of failing and trying again, and then failing again and trying something a new way. And that's a lot of what writing is. A lot of what, like a lot of what we do when we're writing a book. So.
Yeah. Wow.
Yep.
Wow, what an inspiring story. And I have multiple points I would like to bring from this story. First off, lesser important, but still worth mentioning, she does not, if you're watching the vodcast of this, and you should be, she does not look like she's 40 and had two kids. Okay. You are
It's all a
gorgeous.
filter. It's filter and magic. No. Thank you.
And so that is awesome to hear that you persevered through the 10 years because I think it's more of a challenge to start thinking, well, okay, it's been 5 years and this is not getting picked up, so maybe I should just drop it. Maybe I should just put it in the vault, lock up the vault, call it good, maybe try something new. So I liked that you persevered with that. And our first guest on the show, Josh Allen, talks about being gentle with yourself, especially in writing. You need to be gentle with yourself. So if you need that time off, then take it. It's not a timeline against everybody else, it's a race against yourself, right? And I think that's where we get it wrong a lot of the time because there is a lot of high competition and for anyone who doesn't know really about Pitch Wars, it is a rigorous
It's
like process and it's amazing. It's
it
amazing
was,
that they
oh my
did
God,
it. And the
wonderful.
mentors, of course, are like fabulous. In fact, I think from Yanti, one of our people that came on the show, she was a mentor for that as well one year. And it takes a lot from the mentee and it takes a lot from the mentor. And there's a lot going on. So I applaud you for continuing with that and doing it during a time where you were feeling negative about your writing. That's a lot.
Oh man, so
Not
negative.
telling anybody about the wins, like it takes a lot. It's a big process. And so I just want to point out to our listeners that the querying process is different for every author.
It is.
And that there are a lot of people like Jenny who took longer to get there than it appears on screen. And I thought that was interesting that you mentioned that. And it's our book plaque quote for the episode. We always have a plaque quote. There it is. Our
Well, and
inspiration.
I feel like when you talk about this stuff on social media, you don't want to be like, listen, everything sucks, right? You're showing a little bit of like a buffed and shined version of yourself, of your story, of your journey.
Yeah.
But everybody reaches these points where it's hard. It's hard when you see other people, to not compare, right? It's hard not to constantly think that this is a zero-sum game, that if they get that means I can't get it, and start comparing. The whole thing is tough. So I, like a past guest said, being gentle with yourself is very important. I fail at it a lot. I
Mm.
think all of us do,
Yeah.
but it's important to try to do and celebrate the wins. That's something that I have a hard time with, that I have tried to be more intentional. Um, being proud of myself for different milestones that I'm hitting or different deadlines that I'm meeting. It's very, very easy to constantly say, okay, I'll celebrate when I hit X. And then you get to X and you're like, well, I'll celebrate when I get to the other X. But I mean, if you do that, you're never pausing to kind of reflect and say, like, holy crap, I did this hard thing that, like, millions of people in the world all say, hey, I've got a book in me, I want to write a book. And then they don't do it.
Mm-mm.
But we did, right? We actually did sit down and say, okay, I've got the idea and I'm gonna do it. I'm actually gonna do it. So that's something to
And you never
celebrate.
arrive, right? Yeah. You're never gonna,
Yeah.
oh, I'm there. I've arrived. Because
Yeah.
once you the book deal, you still have a lot of work to do. Once you get the
Mm-hmm.
book published and out of there and you've been doing the marketing, you've got another book to write. Like it's always
Yep.
gonna keep going. Life continues. It doesn't ever stop to say, oh, hey, you did it. So it's your job to make that happen. And with that, I wanted to ask you, in those dark nights of the soul, when you're feeling in the past, when you felt like maybe this is never going to be good enough, or maybe I'm not going to be good enough for as a writer for this industry, what did you do to remind yourself why you love what you do? What did you do to, what were those rewards for you, those personal celebrations?
Personal celebrations. Oh man, I don't know. Nothing. I'm bad at that. But the things that to remind myself, the things to stop and say, okay, this is me and I need to keep going, right? When you're trying to convince yourself, I just need to stop. Um, one, taking that space and being okay to take that space. For for me, this is going to be different for everybody. For me, it's getting outside. I live in Colorado. I like to hike. I like to be outside, and just being out in nature really helps my mind take a breath, relax. And that's when I start problem solving, right? For me, it's funny because in Lola at Last, she's forced to go hiking for the summer. And she's like, I'm gonna hate this. I'm vowing to hate this. But she starts realizing there's something about that repetitive nature of being on a hike. You're putting one foot in front of the other, and all you can do is put one foot in front of the other. And it gives, something about that rhythm. It helps my brain. It helps me feel like, okay, my body is moving and my brain has a chance to just start thinking.
Hmm.
And that for me is helpful. I spent a lot of time at gardens, in gardens, around gardens, outside, on the
As
trail.
one does when you compare yourself to Jane Austen, writings.
If I could be in
Walk
a
in the
rose
garden.
garden having a tea party every day, yes, I would be there. Um, no, but the other thing I've done, I say I don't celebrate myself. I do try. I really try. And I luckily have a partner that is very good at wanting me to celebrate my wins and kind of pushing me to do that. Because if not, I would just be like, I would never take a break. I would just be like, let's work on the next thing always. One thing that I did that I think everybody should do if they can is after my first book came out, I planned a vacation. I said, I'm going to plan it for exactly 6 weeks after Being Mary Bennett came out, because that in the cycle is when people have moved on. That's just the nature of this business. There are other books coming out all the time, and they're just as great as yours, and they're just as wonderful, and they deserve to be celebrated. And
Mm.
so you kind of get this very blue period afterwards where you're like, I've worked so hard, I've put so much into this, and now it's done. And now people have moved on. And it's hard to not really beat yourself up. So I went to Mexico for a week. I was like, guess
Wow.
what, guys? I'm gonna lay on a beach. And I didn't bring my laptop. And I just ate and drank and hung out in a pool.
Wow.
And it was wonderful. And
Yeah.
that's not the normal sort of vacation I do. I'm the sort of person who's like, every day we're going to like climb a mountain and go to a museum and blah, blah, blah.
Hmm.
That was the number one thing I did for myself that I think everybody should consider. Not going to Mexico if you don't want to, but like having a movie weekend where you turn off your Wi-Fi and you use like old school DVDs or something. I don't know. What can you do without Wi-Fi? And you just watch a bunch of movies with a friend or going on a hike or something that is totally not book related, that forces you to take your mind off of it. That
Mm.
was incredibly helpful for me.
Wow. That's good to hear. There's a recent episode where we talk about ways to make the query rejection sting less, and something that I've tried to set up is when I hit 101 rejections, which I will not say what number I'm at right now,
Mhm.
then I'm gonna watch 101 Dalmatians with some people that I love and just pop
See,
in a
that's
movie.
perfect.
I I think it is important to reward yourself, even if it's a little like that. I mean, it's just a movie at my house, but it's something to look forward to.
But you know what? It's not little. It's something that you can turn into either, a celebration, but also I tend to be somebody who's very self-deprecating. I like to make fun of myself a lot. And so for a long time when I was cold querying, because before Pitch Wars, everything I did was it was querying,
Hmm.
which is a slog.
It
I printed out a rejection and I had it on my fridge where it was like my white whale of the agent that I wanted. My priorities changed. No longer think that I would be a good fit for that agent. But
mm,
at the time, I really thought this is who I want. And so I kept his rejection on my fridge and kept thinking like someday I'm gonna have an agent and be able to be like, well, F you, agent who said no to me. Um, and then we moved and I took it down and I didn't care anymore. But it helped.
yeah, just do what you can. That's awesome. That's
I
perfect.
think that
Maybe I
is
should
quite
consider
really
that. Maybe I should get a plaque going for my number one agent. But you
yeah.
do change, and there's things in the querying process where when I look at the beginning, I'm like, oh, I'm actually really glad that they rejected me and didn't really take me that seriously because this is so much better now, and I have such a better grasp of the industry now
Yep.
that I don't think I would have been nearly as good before. So there, a lot of good comes from it too, despite
I
the
think
fact that
that
it is grueling.
it is hard. It is hard. And yeah, I think about that a lot too, that like if the first book that I wrote had actually been published, I mean, it was real bad. I didn't know what I was doing. I was just like, I had read so the one of the first books when I rediscovered my love of YA was A Great and Terrible Beauty by Libba Bray. She's still one of my auto buys. I love how she writes. And I basically wrote A Great and Terrible Beauty fan fiction and was like, cool, this is original, and sent it out. And I mean, yeah, it didn't work. It didn't work.
Mm.
But it took making those mistakes and figuring out who I was as a writer, right? Instead of trying to say, this is who I need to be as a writer, it took me trying to figure out where my voice did best, the sort of writing that I excelled at. And you only figure that out by trying, right? I feel like a lot of people talk about voice a lot. It's that one thing that it can be hard to define, it can be hard to
Mhm.
capture. But I think the only way you can figure it out for yourself is by writing a bunch.
And failing,
Yeah,
failing a lot,
yeah.
right? Find a thousand ways how to not create the light bulb, right? Something like that.
Yeah.
What that? It's been amazing, and we're almost out of time. But I do want to ask before we move on, if you have one last hot piece of advice for those starting out in their querying journey, holding on to that hope, what would you tell them?
I would say, oh man, I'm trying to think of something that I haven't said already. You know, I think sometimes you just have to think about the business side of it, right? You
Mhm.
have to go in and say, this person rejecting me isn't doing it to be personal, right? They're not doing it because they're like, I'm an agent because I love to tear people down. And I think sometimes you can fixate on that. You can fixate on why don't they want me? But we are both trying, the writer and the agent, and eventually the editor and all the other people. This is a business that we're hoping to make money from. That's something that I really believe. We do this because we love it. And for me, it's like, I don't know how to do anything else. But at the same time, I put a lot of work into this and I want to be compensated for it.
And you should be compensated
Right,
for it.
right. Because I know sometimes that there can be this feeling of like, well, if it's your art, you should do it just for the art. But art, like, I need to also pay bills and eat and go
Mhm.
on another vacation.
Right.
Uh, so I think sometimes if you step back and say, okay, this was a business decision. And if this person has reservations about me, I wouldn't want to have a career with them. You want someone who really understands your work and your work in the future, because the whole idea is that you're working with this person, hopefully for a big part of your career. And so I think thinking of it that way, just kind of trying to be a little pragmatic about it, it can be hard not to get our feelings hurt. Let your feelings be hurt, give yourself a second, and then say, okay, they wouldn't have worked for me anyway.
Mhm.
You know, they wouldn't have championed me.
Yep, absolutely. And you need that champion. That's what
Mhm.
you need. That's
I
amazing.
will,
Great
there's
advice.
a, I think there might, I don't think he's an agent anymore, but when I was querying, if I was feeling really, if I was feeling like, because you know how now the querying world is no means no, right? No
Hmm.
response. No response means no. Um,
Absolutely.
that is different from when I started, right? Because I've been doing this for a while. And
Mhm.
sometimes you send something off and you're like, did they get it? Is it just floating around out there? And so if
Mhm.
I was feeling like, oh, I just want to hear back from an agent, there was an agent called known as Lightning Bill who you would query him and he would pass so fast. Like sometimes you'd get a reply no in minutes. And so
Wow.
if I just needed a rejection just to hear back from an agent and know that I was emailing people correctly, I
Uh,
would query
Lightning Bill.
Lightning
That's
Bill. Yeah.
I have never heard of him, but that is
I mean,
wherever you there,
I would
Bill.
query him over and over again, but I'd get to the point in my query process where I was like, time for Lightning Bill. I need to hear back.
And that's how it is. It's just waiting, and then you're like, maybe I'll
Yeah.
get an answer. And sometimes getting the rejection is actually like a relief because you're like, oh, you got it.
Right? You can mark
It's
it off on your spreadsheet. You can put
yeah,
an
like take it off of my list. Yeah, my
yes,
little notebook. Yeah,
right?
absolutely. Yeah,
Instead of
that's a great
constantly
point.
being like, maybe it's out there still. Maybe they're thinking about it. That's
Mm,
worse.
that is worse. And just assume that they're not thinking about it. That's a
Yeah.
safer route.
But if you haven't heard back, it's so hard. There's still
It
that
is.
part in your brain that's like, but maybe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Oh man, well, Jenny, it has been such a pleasure to have you on, and I want to thank you for your real and your honest and just abundance of mindset in your answers, in your giving, and I'm very excited to read the next book that you've got coming out, and she does have more coming a little down the pipeline. And with that, I
Yeah.
wanna ask, how can we connect with you? How can we support your community in this exciting time for you?
Yeah, you can find me. I'm on Instagram most of the time. I'm technically on Twitter, not there a lot.
Mm.
So I'm on Instagram at JCP Writes, and my website is jcpetersonwrites.com. Um, and I would say everyone go to the library, go to your local indie and go pick up some books that like make your heart happy, you know, give
Great.
yourself some like nice reading,
So that's why we all started this journey, right? Because we love to
right?
read.
Yeah.
That's where. Yes. Thank you so much for coming on and stick around here for a minute. But for those of you listening, keep on writing, my friends, and hope you have a great week.